The Way to the Top, the story of Grace Holland. Grace Holland grew up in a small village at the foot of majestic mountains. Since early childhood, she was attracted to these peaks, which seemed unattainable and at the same time beckoned with their beauty. She often dreamed of looking at the snow-capped peaks, but she never thought she would be able to conquer even one of them. Her family lived modestly. Her father was a mechanic and her mother worked at the local school. They always supported Grace, but often reminded her of the importance of stability. "Dreams are good, but life requires real action," her father used to say. At the age of 16, Grace suffered a great loss. Her younger sister, with whom she was very close, died in an accident. It changed her forever. The loss made Grace realize how quickly life can change and that she didn't want to waste it on fears or doubts. One morning, as the sun was just beginning to illuminate the mountains, she decided that she wanted to try to conquer the highest peak she had seen since she was a child. It was a dream that seemed impossible, but that's why it became important to Grace. The decision to climb the mountain was easy, but the first steps to realize her dream were extremely difficult. Grace had never been mountaineering before, and she had neither the necessary equipment, nor the knowledge nor experience. She started with the simplest thing, learning. Grace enrolled in a climbing course in a neighboring town. Every Saturday she took the bus there, spending all her savings on tuition. The instructor, an older man named Henry, immediately noticed her determination. Conquering the top is not just about physical strength. It's more about patience and the willingness to face your own fears, he said one day when Grace asked him how to become a good climber. Grace started training her body and mind. Daily jogging, hours on the machines, and endlessly repeating knots for climbing ropes became her routine. During her training, Grace faced her first obstacles. One day when she came home from training, her mother said, "Grace, are you sure this is the right thing to do? We're worried about you. Maybe you're wasting time and money on something you'll never be able to do." These words hurt her. She began to doubt whether her dream was really worth the sacrifice. But when she remembered her sister, she realized that she couldn't give up. Grace decided to go on, even if it meant disappointing her loved ones. She knew that her dream was more than just reaching the top. It was proof that she was capable of doing something more than what others expected of her. After several months of training and learning the basics of mountaineering, Grace was ready for her first real challenge, a low local mountain recommended by her instructor Henry. This mountain was nothing like the majestic peaks she had dreamed of, but it was a serious challenge for a beginner. Grace, along with a small group of climbers, went on her first hike. The first kilometers were easy. The sun was shining and everyone was in a good mood. But the higher they climbed, the colder it got, and the harder the steps became. When the group reached the first steep climb, Grace felt afraid. Her hands trembled as she used the ropes and carabiners for the first time. For a moment, she thought, "What am I doing here? This is not for me." Henry, who had been watching her, came over and said, "It is normal to be afraid. But it is important to remember that you have already taken a huge step. You're here, and that's what matters." These words helped Grace to gather herself. She focused on each movement, not thinking about fear or height. And when she reached the top, she felt a wave of joy and pride. It was the first proof that she could do more than she thought. When she returned home, Grace felt that she had changed. She was no longer the girl who was afraid of failure. She saw how much she could achieve if she didn't give up. However, her family's reaction was mixed. Her mother, although happy to see her success, still didn't understand why Grace was spending so much time on this dangerous hobby. "You've already proven you can climb a mountain. Why not stop here and focus on something more stable?" she asked. But Grace knew this was just the beginning. Her dream of conquering the highest peak she had seen since childhood now seemed even more real. Grace decided that her next step was to train for a bigger mountain, but she needed better equipment and more time to prepare. She started working overtime at a local cafe to earn money for the gear she needed. Every day was filled with work and training. She even started running with a heavy backpack to get used to the strain. Although her journey was challenging, Grace felt that she was getting closer to her goal every day. Having gathered the necessary equipment and earned enough money, Grace decided to conquer the mountain, which the locals called Wild Peak. It was a moderately difficult mountain, but with unpredictable weather conditions. Henry, her instructor, supported this decision, although he cautioned her. "Grace, remember, the mountain does not forgive carelessness. Preparation is half the battle, the other half is patience and judgment." Grace understood the risks, but her desire to prove to herself that she was capable of more was stronger than her fear. During the expedition, Grace faced what it meant to be in a real fight with nature for the first time. On the second day of the trip, a strong wind began to blow, forcing her to hold on to every rock and rope with double the caution. At some point, she felt her legs giving out and her fear returning. Thoughts began to run through her mind. Maybe this is too much. Isn't it better to just turn back? But then she remembered how hard it had been to get to this point. She remembered all the training, sacrifices, and dreams that had brought her here. On the third day of the trip, Grace and her team reached a plateau where they could see the summit. It was a breathtaking sight, snow shimmering under the sun and clouds that seemed so close you could reach them with your hand. However, the last stage of the climb was the most difficult. Each step required all her strength, and the cold penetrated through her layers of clothing. But when Grace finally reached the top, she felt an incredible wave of joy and pride. Standing at the top, Grace looked at the world below. She remembered all the doubts that had haunted her, all the words that had encouraged her to stop. But it was here, in the snow and wind, that she realized. Nothing is impossible if you are willing to fight for your dream. This moment became one of the most important in her life. She realized that the peaks that seem unattainable exist only in our heads. When Grace returned home, she could not hide her joy. She told her friends and family how important it is not to give up, even when you feel like you're at the end of your rope. Her mother made her first open confession. "Grace, I didn't believe you could do it. But now I see how much you've changed. I am very proud of you." These words became a real blessing for Grace. She realized that her dream was not only for her, but also for those who looked up to her example. After successfully conquering the Wild Peak, Grace became more confident in her abilities. Her victory attracted the attention of the local climbing community. People started inviting her to meetings, seminars, and even asked her to share her experience with newcomers. One day, after her performance, Grace was approached by a young man named Tony. He said, "Your story is inspiring. I've always wanted to go mountaineering, but I was afraid to even start. How did you overcome your fears?" Grace replied, "I didn't get rid of my fear. I learned to move forward despite it. Fear is just a signal that you're getting out of your comfort zone." This conversation gave her the idea to create a training camp for beginners where she could teach basic mountaineering skills and share her experience. Grace rented a small plot of land not far from the Wild Peak and began organizing the first training sessions. At first, there were only a few participants, but thanks to recommendations and enthusiastic feedback, the number of people interested began to grow rapidly. The camp became a place where people not only learned, but also made new friends, shared their fears, and supported each other. Grace became the leader and mentor that many had been looking for all their lives. However, success did not come without challenges. One day, during a training climb, one of the group members fell and was slightly injured. It came as a shock to Grace. She began to blame herself. "Maybe I'm not experienced enough to teach others. What if it ends up worse next time?" These thoughts plagued her for days, and she even considered closing the camp. But her instructor Henry, who remained her mentor, said, "Grace, you have given these people something more than climbing techniques. You gave them faith in themselves. Mistakes happen, but it's important that you keep going. These words helped her overcome her doubts and move on. A year after the camp was founded, Grace decided that she was ready for her main goal, to conquer the highest mountain she had seen since childhood. This peak was known for its challenging routes and required not only physical but also mental preparation. Together with a small team, Grace began preparing for this expedition. Her participants were not just partners, but people who were inspired by her example and believed in her leadership. The expedition to the highest mountain was the most difficult challenge in Grace's life. She realized that this peak required not only physical strength but also a flawless team, because a mistake could be too costly. For several months, she prepared herself and her team. It was grueling training, hiking long distances, spending nights in difficult conditions, and learning how to interact in extreme situations. Grace also organized a series of lectures with experienced climbers who had already conquered similar peaks. One of these meetings turned out to be extremely important. The famous climber Marcus Braydon said, "Do not forget that it is not only physical strength that leads to the top. You have to believe in yourself, even when everything seems impossible." These words became a reminder for Grace why she started this journey in the first place. The day of the expedition came. Grace and her team started climbing at dawn. At first, everything went well, but at an altitude of several thousand meters, the weather changed dramatically. Strong winds began to blow, and the temperature dropped to critically low levels. The team stopped to assess the situation. One of the participants, a young man named Tony, whom Grace had trained at her camp, looked scared. He said quietly, "Maybe we should go back. It's too dangerous." Grace looked at him and calmly replied, "We're all scared, Tony. But remember why you are here. We can make it if we support each other." These words helped not only Tony, but the entire team to gather their strength and continue the journey. The last kilometers were the hardest. Each step required tremendous effort, and oxygen was becoming scarce. But Grace did not stop. She remembered how hard she had worked to get to this point. When they finally reached the top, it was a moment that cannot be described in words. Grace stood above the world, looking at the endless horizons, and felt something she had never experienced before: absolute freedom. The return from the top was no less difficult, but the team stuck together. At every step, Grace reminded herself, "This is not just my victory. It's a victory for everyone who believed in me and walked alongside me." Upon returning home, Grace experienced a huge wave of emotions. On the one hand, she had achieved what she had dreamed of all her life, but on the other hand, she felt empty. She asked herself, "What now? Is it possible to experience something more than this?" Her friends and family hailed her as a heroine. She received many invitations for interviews, offers to talk about her experience, and even to become the face of an advertising campaign for a well-known sports equipment brand. But Grace felt that something important was missing. Her dream had come true, but she realized that life can't stop at one peak. She started looking for a new goal. One evening, Grace decided to look through some old photos. Among them, she found a picture from her childhood, where she and her sister were standing at the foot of the very mountain she had just conquered. On the back of the photo was a caption: "Someday we will climb it together." This awakened a new purpose in Grace. She realized that now her mission was to help others find their own peak, even if it was not physical but metaphorical. Grace decided to dedicate herself to educating and supporting people who had dreams of their own but didn't believe they could realize them. She organized a series of lectures and workshops where she talked about her journey, the challenges and lessons she learned. Her stories attracted people from all walks of life. One day, a woman named Sarah approached her and said, "I never thought I could change anything in my life. But your story has inspired me to believe that I can do more." These words made Grace realize that she was on the right track. Grace decided to create a platform called Your Summit, where anyone could share their dreams, find support, and get an action plan. She used her knowledge of mountaineering as a metaphor for achieving any goal. Preparation is your plan. The team is your support. The summit is your success. The platform quickly became popular. People wrote about their dreams, shared their achievements, and inspired each other. Grace's idea grew into a global movement. The platform began to attract participants from different countries. People created their own peaks that they wanted to conquer, from starting a business to improving their health or rebuilding a relationship. One day, Grace received a message from a man in Africa. Your inspiration has helped me organize an education program for children in my village. It was my dream, and now it's a reality because of you. That was the moment Grace realized that her impact now extended far beyond mountaineering. Grace began to be invited to international conferences where she shared her experiences. She didn't think she was special, but her sincerity and perseverance inspired people all over the world. At one such conference, she said, "My mountain was real, but each of you has your own mountain. And if you are willing to fight, plan and work, you can conquer it." A few years later, Your Mountain became a symbol of dreams and achievements. Grace continued to work on the project, but also found time for herself, traveling to new places and meeting people who told her how her story had changed their lives. She wrote a book about her journey that became a bestseller. In the book, she shared simple but powerful lessons. 1. Dreams seem impossible until you take the first step. 2. Fear is your best teacher. 3. Never conquer the top alone, a team makes you stronger. At the book launch, Grace said, "I started this journey to find myself. But now I realize that my true path is to help others find their peaks. Together we can achieve more." Grace Holland's story reminds us that every peak, no matter how unattainable, can be conquered if we take the first step. Share this story to inspire others to pursue their dreams, and subscribe to Rise and Inspire to learn more about people who are turning the impossible into reality. Your peak is waiting for you.